In one American city, 85% of all properties face a major or higher risk of flooding. Not an unusual weather event, not a fringe statistical outlier, a baseline reality that the insurance industry has already priced into its exit strategy. These are not cities that had one bad decade. These are cities running out of time to pretend one good press release will fix a 50-year math problem. We are counting down 12 American cities hemorrhaging residents right now, and the brutal, data-backed truth behind every single one. Like this if you want the numbers before they become your zip code. Subscribe if you'd rather know now than find out when the moving trucks show up. Let's go. Number 12. Camden, New Jersey. America's most convenient cautionary tale. Camden sits directly across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. You can see the Philadelphia skyline from Camden. You can see prosperity from Camden. You just cannot access it. The city lost its shipbuilding industry, its manufacturing base, and eventually its tax revenue across 5 decades of sustained economic evacuation. The population is around 72,000. The poverty rate is 33%, more than double the national average. The violent crime rate stands at 1,586 per 100,000 residents. That is 321% above the national average. Schools average a grade of F in actual proficiency. The city dissolved its entire police department in 2013, not as a reform, but as a bankruptcy-adjacent financial decision, and rebuilt it from scratch under county control. Crime improved. The numbers are genuinely better. And Camden still ranks in the bottom 3% of all American cities for safety. Living in Camden is like being the neighbor of the most successful family on the block and having none of the same mailman. One longtime resident said what a lot of people think and almost nobody says. We live next door to one of the most prosperous corridors in the country. Not a single door in it opens for us. Camden is not a forgotten city. It is a city that America placed next to something great, watched closely to see what would happen, and then forgot to check back on for 40 years. Number 11. Dayton, Ohio. The Wright brothers figured out how to leave. Everyone followed. Dayton invented powered flight. It also invented the cash register, the self-starter, and the pop-top aluminum can, which is a lot of invention for a city that now has 48% fewer residents than it did at its peak. The population has fallen from just over 260,000 to around 137,000. The poverty rate is 26%. The median household income is $41,000, roughly half the national median. And then the opioid crisis arrived. Montgomery County, which includes Dayton, recorded nearly 600 drug overdose deaths in a single year at the peak. 600. In 2017, the city formally requested federal disaster assistance because the emergency response system could not keep up with the overdose calls. Manufacturing had already left. The opioid crisis arrived like it knew a vacancy when it saw one. One Dayton resident described it with the kind of quiet devastation that does not show up in GDP reports. My parents worked here their whole lives and retired with something. I worked here my whole life, and I am not sure what I am working toward. Dayton is genuinely rebuilding. There are real cranes and real investments, but when a city loses half its people and then gets hit by a public health catastrophe of that scale, rebuilding is not a 5-year plan. It is a generational reckoning that nobody is moving to Dayton to speed up. Number 10. Gary, Indiana, where the steel left and nothing came back for it. Gary, Indiana was built for one reason: U.S. Steel. At its peak in 1960, nearly 178,000 people lived here. Today, the population is approximately 67,000. That is a 62% loss in 60 years. The poverty rate is 33%. Median household income is $38,000. The city has been declining at roughly 0.5% every year, and the trajectory has not reversed. Gary is also the birthplace of Michael Jackson. That is the detail every travel piece mentions. It is also the detail that tells you exactly what the city has left to work with when the most famous thing about your local economy is a childhood address. One Gary native said what the numbers already confirm. The steel mill was not just a job. It was the entire ecosystem. The schools, the tax base, the grocery stores, the everything. When the steel left, it did not just leave a gap. It left a city with no skeleton. Gary is not losing people because of one bad administration or one wrong policy call. It is losing people because the single industry that built it decided it no longer needed to be here. And 60 years later, nobody has shown up to replace the weight of what left. Number 9. Shreveport, Louisiana, the oil city running on fumes and denial. Shreveport was built on oil and natural gas. For most of the 20th century, that was enough. Then it was not. The city has lost 5.8% of its population since 2019. For context, the census projection model now assumes a continued annual decline of 1.2%, which means Shreveport loses another 10,000 residents this decade if nothing structurally changes. The current population is around 180,000. The poverty rate is nearly 19%. Young professionals are leaving for Houston, Dallas, and Austin in search of an energy economy that still exists. 2/3 of Louisiana parishes lost population in 2024. Shreveport did not just participate in that trend. It led it among the state's mid-sized cities. Living in Shreveport right now feels like working for a company that everyone knows is in trouble, but nobody in HR will admit it. The quarterly meetings are still happening. The free coffee is still there. And then one Friday afternoon, the emails stop. One Shreveport resident said it plainly. There is nothing wrong with this city that a real industry would not fix. The problem is, we have not found the replacement yet. Oil left. The plan for what comes next is still in draft. And while it is in draft, the people who can leave are leaving. Number 8. Youngstown, Ohio. They called it Black Monday, and they were not being dramatic. On September 19, 1977, Youngstown Sheet and Tube shut its doors and eliminated 40,000 jobs in a single day. The people of Youngstown call it Black Monday. The rest of America mostly forgot about it by 1985. Youngstown did not get to forget. The population peaked at 166,000 in 1950. Today, it is approximately 59,000. A 64% decline in 75 years. Not a correction, not a dip, a complete structural collapse in slow motion that the country watched like a nature documentary and then changed the channel. The poverty rate is 36%. Median household income is $34,000, less than half the national median. Nearly 19% of housing units are vacant. One Youngstown resident said what urban planners almost never say in public. At some point you stop asking why people leave and start asking why anyone stays. And then you meet the people who stayed. And you realize the ones who stayed are not the ones who could not leave. They are the ones who refused to. Youngstown is not a city that gave up on itself. It is a city that watched the economy give up on it and has been quietly building a future from whatever the evacuation left behind. Number 7. Flint, Michigan. The city the government literally poisoned. Flint was the birthplace of General Motors. At its peak, nearly 200,000 people lived here, most of them connected to the auto industry in one way or another. Today, the population is around 80,000, a 60% loss across 7 decades. Then, in 2014, a state-appointed emergency manager switched the city's water supply to the Flint River to save money. The pipes were old, the water was corrosive, nobody treated it properly. Lead got into the water, lead got into the children. 12 people died from Legionnaire's disease during the outbreak. A federal public health state of emergency was declared for all of Genesee County. 5 years later, nearly 1 in 5 Flint residents met clinical criteria for depression. 1 in 4 had symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. The poverty rate today is 34%. Median household income is $36,000. Living in Flint is like having a landlord who broke the plumbing, blamed you for complaining about it, and then handed you a settlement and called it resolved. One longtime resident said what no official statement has ever fully captured. People ask why we do not trust the government. We do not trust the government because the government put lead in our water, watched children get sick, and spent 4 years arguing about jurisdiction. That is the whole answer. Flint is not rebuilding slowly because it lacks ambition. It is rebuilding slowly because institutional betrayal at that scale takes generations to metabolize. Like this video if you have ever lived somewhere that felt like it was being abandoned in real time. Subscribe because the cities ahead on this list are why that feeling has a zip code. Number 6. Syracuse, New York. 5 decades of decline and counting. Syracuse was called the Salt City because it was once the largest salt producer in North America. The salt industry left, manufacturing left after that, then the middle class left. The city has posted 5 consecutive decades of population decline, a 33% loss since 1950. Current population is approximately 150,000, down from a peak near 220,000. 1 in 4 residents lives below the poverty line. Child poverty consistently ranks among the worst in the Northeast. The school district has faced funding crises for so long they have become a structural feature rather than an emergency. 8 in 10 New York State cities and towns lost population between 2020 and 2023. Syracuse was not the exception. It was the template. Living in Syracuse is like being the middle child in a state where all the attention goes to New York City and all the investment goes to the suburbs. Nobody is actively rooting against you. They just keep forgetting to include you. One Syracuse native said it in a way that landed. This city has everything it needs to turn around. The university, the location, the bones. What it does not have is the economic infrastructure that makes any of that matter to a 25-year-old choosing where to build a life. Bones are not a competitive advantage. Nashville has bones too, and better weather. Number 5. Rochester, New York, the company town when the company filed for bankruptcy. Rochester was Kodak. For most of the 20th century, Eastman Kodak employed 60,000 people in this city and built an entire regional identity around one brand, one product, and one analog technology. Then digital photography arrived and Kodak bet on the wrong future. By 2012, it had filed for bankruptcy. 60,000 jobs became a memory. The city has lost more than 30% of its population since its peak. The poverty rate is approximately 28%, one of the highest of any mid-sized American city. The child poverty rate ranks among the worst in the Northeast. 1 in 4 Rochester families lives below the poverty line. Living in post-Kodak Rochester is like working for a company so dominant for so long that everyone forgot the company could fail. And then it failed. And the city that built its schools and tax base and identity around that company has spent 15 years figuring out what it is now. One Rochester resident described it in a way that did not need statistics to land. My grandfather, my father, and my uncle all worked at Kodak. We did not just have a job, we had a future. When Kodak left, it did not just close factories. It closed an entire way of understanding what this city was for. Rochester is rebuilding around healthcare, education, and advanced manufacturing. Progress is real. But when one employer defined your entire sense of self for a century, rebuilding takes longer than a decade and hurts more than the projections show. Number 4. Cleveland, Ohio. The comeback nobody fully believes yet. Cleveland has been the comeback story everyone wants to believe for 30 years. The economy is diversifying. Crime has been falling. The downtown is genuinely recovering. And yet, Cleveland remains the second poorest large city in the United States. 28% of residents live below the poverty line, second only to Detroit. After years of consecutive population losses, Cleveland saw a modest increase of roughly 1,000 residents in 2024. That is real. But the city lost 5% of its total population between 2019 and 2024. And the 2024 growth was concentrated almost entirely in the 65 and older age group. The people moving in are older adults. The people leaving are working-age families with children, which means the demographic trend points in the wrong direction for long-term economic recovery, no matter what the downtown cranes suggest. Living in Cleveland right now is like dating. Someone who is genuinely doing the work, but whose results are still not matching the effort in every neighborhood that needs them. Progress is real. The distribution of that progress is the problem. One Cleveland resident said it with the precision that only lived experience provides. Downtown looks like the future. 20 minutes away still looks like the aftermath of a slow-motion evacuation that nobody ever officially declared a disaster. Number 3. Buffalo, New York. Affordable is not the same as recovered. Buffalo lost more than half its peak population across 50 years, 580,000 in 1950, under 270,000 today. That is the 4th largest percentage decline of any major American city in the 20th century. The poverty rate was approximately 23% in 2024, down from 27% the year before, which is genuine progress. Zillow named Buffalo one of America's hottest property markets in 2025, driven by affordability that looks compelling next to coastal prices. Young buyers from New York City and Boston are arriving. The waterfront has been redeveloped. The bills are relevant again, and still. 8 in 10 New York State cities and towns lost population between 2020 and 2023. Buffalo was one of them. The new arrivals are real. The structural math underneath them is also real. Living in Buffalo right now is like moving into a neighborhood because the rent is finally reasonable, and then slowly learning why the rent was so reasonable for so long. One Buffalo native said what the optimism articles tend to skip over. Buffalo is affordable because of what happened to it. The same forces that emptied it out are why you can buy a house here for a quarter of what it costs in Boston. We are not a deal. We are a city still doing the work. Calling us a hot market does not change the 50-year math. It just delays the conversation. Number 2. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The rebrand was real. Ask the neighborhoods that missed it. Pittsburgh is the model. Pittsburgh is the success story. Pittsburgh is what every struggling Rust Belt city is supposed to become. Tech investment, Carnegie Mellon graduates. Medical research, a skyline that genuinely looks like a city on the way up. The reports are not entirely wrong. Pittsburgh peaked at 675,000 residents in 1950. Today, it has approximately 307,000, a 55% population loss across 75 years. Allegheny County lost 25,000 residents between 2020 and 2023. 4 domestic migrants left for every 1 international migrant who arrived. The poverty rate in Pittsburgh climbed to 20.1% in 2024, rising even as poverty fell nationally and statewide. 57,000 people in this celebrated comeback city live below the poverty line. Living in Pittsburgh's rebrand is like seeing the new menu at a restaurant that just renovated the front of the house and forgot that most of the tables are still in the back. One longtime Pittsburgh resident said it the way people say things when they are exhausted by being used as a proof of concept. Downtown looks incredible. Oakland looks incredible. The South Side looks incredible. Ask me how the Hill District is doing. Ask me how Homewood is doing. Ask me how the neighborhoods that did not get the venture capital are doing. Pittsburgh reinvented its skyline. It did not reinvent itself equally. Both things are true. The people in the neighborhoods left behind are not interested in choosing which truth gets to lead. Number 1. New Orleans, Louisiana. The most beautiful city in America that the math is slowly winning. New Orleans holds a distinction no other American city holds. From 2020 to 2024, it lost 3.9% of its population. The next closest cities, San Juan, Jackson, and San Francisco, each lost approximately 2%. New Orleans lost almost twice as fast as any of them. The city now has approximately 358,000 residents. It is smaller than it was in 2012. 28,400 people have left for other parts of the country since 2020. Immigration offsets some of that. Not enough. 85% of all properties in Metro New Orleans face a major or higher risk of flooding. Homeowners insurance is either unaffordable or functionally unavailable in entire neighborhoods as insurers recalculate the actuarial reality of a city built below sea level during a period of intensifying Gulf storms. The poverty rate is 21%. The Metro has only 84% of the population it had in 2000. Living in New Orleans is like loving someone who keeps telling you the relationship is fine, while the house they live in is slowly sliding into the water and neither of you can afford to move. One New Orleans resident said what every climate economist confirms and nobody in local politics wants to fully say. We are not losing people because they stopped loving this city. Nobody stops loving New Orleans. We are losing people because loving a city stops being enough when you cannot afford the insurance, cannot stay dry during a regular rain event, and cannot make the numbers work no matter how hard you try. New Orleans is not a failing city. It is an extraordinary, irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind American city that is running out of the financial infrastructure to keep the people who love it most from making the decision they never wanted to make. Nobody leaves New Orleans because they wanted to. They leave because the math won. And when the math wins that fight, we all lose something that cannot be rebuilt from scratch somewhere drier. If this list made you angry, sad, or quietly aware of your own zip code, drop it in the comments. Subscribe because America is shifting faster than the headlines can track, and this channel is where you find out what is actually happening before it becomes a trend you were too late for.